We're really pleased to have Chantal Kerivan. She and her husband own the Auberge to Stowe. Most of you probably know that. A bed and breakfast here in Stowe. And Chantal went on a very interesting adventure this fall and on the Camino de Santiago, and she's going to talk about it.
So thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you weren't expecting Hillary Clinton's...
No.
Maybe you want to sit up front. I hope you weren't expecting Hillary Clinton's experience in presenting, because I haven't had quite the experience she's had. I'll do my best. Can you hear me now, Bob?
Fine.
All right. So tonight's talk is going to be part me telling you about my adventure, but it's also going to be part me hopefully inspiring you to believe that you too can have adventure, because that's truly a fulfilling experience for me. My trip doesn't start with me walking out the door, foliage season, and end with me coming back through. It started quite a bit before then. And there were still more things happening to me, mostly mentally. I came back on Thanksgiving Day. It's now almost 2 months later, to let things percolate and to be ready to share my experience. Many of the conversations I had leading up to this, as well as since I've returned, have informed this talk tonight. And one of the biggest questions I got the most frequently was why when I was I wanted. All I had to do was work hard. And it feels like for the past 30 plus years, that's all I've done is work hard, set a goal, work towards that goal, set new goals, where I was going to college, undergraduate degree, graduate degree, getting men, trying to raise them in a balanced environment. This was a big one for me, which we did about 15 years ago when we moved to Stowe and bought the bed and breakfast. And after a few years, I felt like everything was on cruise control. The first 5 years of owning the inn were quite a challenge. Things in and got things under control. The cruise control portion of it for a number of years. And what's next? You know, where's the next goal? But we still had kids in high school, so we felt that maintain that altitude for a little while and keep the course. So and the bottom fell out of the market. So transition out of innkeeping. The bottom fell out of the inn on the market at the time. So in 2014, our youngest son, Brendan, graduated from high school. And a couple of years before that, I threw that in there, not particular line in the sand, but I think at some time around that magical age number, a lot of, so I was struggling with what my purpose was, with the boys not home anymore. and that wasn't a project, much of a project anymore. I didn't know. And after we put the inn on the market, gosh, so many people kept saying, "What's next? What's next? What's next?" And my answer was always the same: I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. But I felt tension building inside of me every time that question was asked of me. And it was leading me to become anxious and frustrated. And this past summer, we had a pretty serious offer on the inn. And I thought, well, the break's going to occur naturally. You know, I'll be able to focus on what's next after we sell the inn, and it's going to happen. Summer, and that really, I'm not diagnosed, but now that natural break was not going to how long I could stand. A friend came to me in September and noticed how miserable I was, and he suggested Plum Village. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but at the time I just sort of nodded and said, okay, yeah, I'll look into it. A plan started to come together. I started identifying necessary ingredients to be able to have a productive break. Google anything besides Plum Village and airfare. Enough time. About break with Sean. That 3 days that you went to New York in June was your break. And I said, no, not so much. Vacation, but it wasn't. I don't know, but 3 days is not. I also thought it was really important to be away from the familiar. And that is not only the physical environment, which I think the familiar can be a distraction, but also the familiar in terms of people, and that's what leads me to the by yourself. So being by yourself doesn't mean being alone, but it means, in my opinion, being away from the familiar. So no friends, no family. Sean and I have been, let me see how I can say this. Remember that game you used to play when you were kids? Maybe you still play it. Maybe not, you're a little too old for that. You go to a birthday party, friend's leg, and you have the three-legged race. Well, I feel like for the race, and but I started to wonder whether I made my leg from that other leg, whether I could stand up. I'd sort of lost my own, I didn't know who I was. I needed to find out if I was able to and stand on my own. And with the support of Sean, I was able to do that. Took me to Plum Village for 1 week, And I followed that with 2 weeks on the Camino de Santiago. So my friend had suggested Plum Village, and I did a little research on it, and basically it's for those who don't know me, I'm a practicing Roman Catholic. I was really sad in my life, and I said, well, let's give it a try, see what's going to happen here. It was really a thing for me. It was I had constraints. So this 1 week at the Buddhist monastery cost 330 euros, and that was all meals and lodging in a dormitory, but I was fine with that. And all the meditation you could stand. We got up every morning at 5:30 in the morning, walked over to the temple, sat on a bunch of bean bags, closed our eyes, and stared at the inside of our eyelids for 50 minutes. The purpose being to think about nothing. And if you think that's easy, give that a try. The first day it was a guided meditation, but after that you were on your own, and you always had to refocus. So, this isn't going to be a lesson on meditation, but it has a lot to do with focusing on your breathing. Every day, right, and that was to walk without purpose for about 50 minutes. Focusing on the moment. So maybe some of you have heard of mindfulness, mindful meditation. Well, basically it's about thinking, at that time of year it was fall, and I could hear the crunching of the leaves under my feet, and I could see the birds in the sky, and I could observe the dead lotus flowers, and you just focus on what's around you. And when you do that, you don't think about yesterday or tomorrow, or your problems that might be of yesterday or tomorrow, or what you coulda, shoulda, woulda done, or all of those things. You just really empty your mind. And if you do it every day a lot, you start to feel the benefits of it. Which I did, and I was surprised. I think it was a case of what I often tell people is if you do something intensely a lot, you can really feel the benefits of it as opposed to just doing it occasionally. I had that experience. The first time I ever did yoga was Bikram, and I did it 7 days in a row. So I felt the pain, but I also felt the gain very quickly. When I talk about skiing with our guests, I say, take a lesson, take several lessons, ski several days in a row, because you'll see the difference between the first day and the third or fourth day. If you just ski 5 days a season, try and ski them 5 days in a row, because you will progress. If you just ski, and I'm talking about skiing because I know a lot of you can identify with this, if you ski 5 days in a row, and it's once in January, once in February, once in, you know what I mean? You spread it out, stay out on skis. So, meditation in the morning, walking meditation, then we had working meditation. And that was mindfully working. So one of my tasks one day was to rake leaves. Well, as you can see, I'm in nature here. There's a lot of leaves. That would be like going up into Katy Forest and raking leaves. It wasn't about raking leaves. It wasn't a job that had to be done. Connecting with nature and focusing on the task at hand, not the end result. One day I was assigned to strip leaves off of branches. So something called dharma, positive way. The only other thing I'll talk about in terms of Plum Village is the food. Before I left, I think I shared with some of you, I think I'm going to be eating rice 3 times a day, not focusing on the food. The food was extraordinary. I don't know what I ate half the time, but it was really good. All meals were taken in complete silence, mindfully, which means everything that got put in our mouths, put in your mouth and chew it 30 times and think about what effort went into it and what it did and where it might have come from. It was part of the whole experience. For someone like me, it was really, like I said, coming out of my comfort zone. I'm already emotion going. A really incredible preparation for the next 2 weeks. And I didn't know this when I put it together. But I quickly came to realize it. And the reason I thought about doing the Camino afterwards was because it was just down the road. And I had heard the Camino from other friends. I also had seen the movie. I have a friend who actually did it before the movie was made, and who shared sort of had. So after a couple of trains and a bus ride, I believe, I got to the start of the Camino. How many people had never heard about the Camino until how much background information I want to give, because I don't want to bore everybody. But so the first image here is an image of St. James the Apostle. He was an apostle of Jesus, and there's a lot of legend here. So it's not really sure where reality starts and where legend starts. But legend has it that after the death of Jesus in the Galicia region, to preach the Gospels and spread Christianity. At the time, that part of Spain was occupied by Celts, believe it or not, who practiced Druidic type of religion. Legend has it he didn't do so well, and went back to Jerusalem. And this is where reality steps back in. He was summarily beheaded by King Herod, and then we switch back to legend. Legend has it his remains were taken back to the northwestern part of Spain. He sort of disappears for several hundreds of years, during which time Spain was occupied by the Moors, who are Muslims from Morocco. When the Moors north into France, back and won at the Battle of Zaragoza, but his nephew Roland, in the Song of Roland, was killed in Roncesvalles. But all in all, Christianity was seeping into Spain at that time. That was the period of the Crusades, and that's when the remains or a tomb was discovered by a shepherd in northwestern Spain, and decided that this must be the remains of James, and established this way In the middle there we have a photo or an image of one of the Knights Templar. I don't know how familiar again you are with Crusades, but there was Crusades to the Holy Land and Crusades to Rome and Crusades through northern Spain. But oftentimes the pilgrims were attacked, and the Knights Templar, amongst others, protected the peoples, the pilgrims. And there are a lot of traces still on the Camino of their presence. After that trail over the Pyrenees in particular was used by Napoleon when he was trying to invade France. So it's a well-worn path. So that's just a little bit of the historical background. I'll cover a little bit of the geography as well. I traveled the Camino Frances, which is pictured here in the heavy red line, which starts in Saint-Jean-de-Pied-de-Port in France and goes to Santiago de Compostela. All of the pilgrimages end in Santiago de Compostela, but there are lots of different ways to get there. I chose that one for a number of reasons. Or let me talk about some of the other ways just so that you understand, and then I can pass this book around, which is a guidebook. In theory, as soon as a pilgrim steps out of his home, his or her home, that's so if you're in the Netherlands, outside your door. Obviously, if you're traveling from all over Europe, at some point you are going to funnel into this particular area, and that's why that is the path well worn. Some people, I actually ran into a couple of pilgrims. One had started in the Netherlands and had walked from the Netherlands, and at the end, on my last day, I met a young German gentleman who had walked all the way from Germany. So people walk, today even walk from right outside their home. Here, if you want to start passing that around so people can look at the map. But one of the traditional starting points is Saint-Jean-de-Pied-de-Port. So it's 800 kilometers from Saint-Jean to Santiago, 497 miles. The highest peak is 4,200 feet. 216,000 traveled the Camino in 2013. That is, in the last 10 or so years, I guess in 2000, the other numbers, it used to be about 50,000, and so it's grown enormously over the years. I mean, in the past, they were most of the way just for spiritual reasons, not necessarily the Catholic tradition. I encountered people from all over, at least obvious. But Koreans? A lot of Koreans struggled to communicate with. There were Koreans that spoke nothing but Korean, which is kind of odd as well. Why it's such a popular thing, but they're a very significant demographic. Their pilgrim was, and the youngest pilgrim, and people walk it, and how many people are pushed on wheelchairs. That's all available. I just wanted to do some basic stuff right here. So my plan is not to detail day by day. It's not particularly exciting. But I'm going to give you the high points and the low points. So this is the very first day. I got up in Saint-Jean-de-Pied-de-Port in the morning, early, enthusiastic, energized, motivated, high, to an incredibly beautiful day. You have to understand that it was first week in November. When I went to the Pilgrim's office, I was advised that for a rescue, if you need a rescue crossing the Pyrenees. Right, Neil? And that I should be mindful of the weather forecast, and there it is on the wall. I encountered pilgrims a little later on who said to me the week before I set out there was snow, and the day I got up and went was beautiful, clear, and warm. The first image is the sun coming up on the tips of the Pyrenees. In the middle I'm at Roland Spring. Wild horses, sheep, views, incredible views. It was extraordinary. I did walk for 8 hours, which is about the average at an average pace according to the guidebook that I'm just sending through. I walked alone. The pilgrims I had stayed with the night before in the dorm room that I was in. That dorm room had 15 people in it. 14 of them were men, and they were all under 30. So I knew I wasn't going to be walking with anybody. So I just got up early and walked them, and that was good for me. In that pilgrim office, I also picked up a pilgrim's passport. You don't have to do this. And by the way, that statistic that I put up earlier of 213,000 pilgrims, those are registered pilgrims. There are all kinds of people on this trail that don't register. So you're welcome to pass this around, and basically it just stamps all of the places I stopped on the way. So this is not a great slide, but it's the tool that I use the most. Again, they gave it to me in the pilgrim's office. It is well worn. If you only want to take one thing, this is the thing you take. They gave me 2 pieces of paper, actually, at the pilgrim's office. This one and this one, which has all of the hostels along the way and when they're open or closed. If you're going to walk the entire way, it's at an average pace of 20 to 30 kilometers a day. It takes about 33 days. I didn't have 33 days. I had 2 weeks. So I decided to walk the first 3 days because I didn't feel like riding over the mountains, and I don't even know if anyone in their right mind would do that. There is an alternate route, by the way. There's an alternate route to that first day 1, which goes through the valley. That elevation gain is 1,200 meters, so it's a pretty steep hike. So I walked the first 3 days, and then I rented a bicycle and did the rest on a bicycle. I'm in character. I'm trying to be in character. I enjoyed the walking. I enjoyed it a lot. It was nice because every night I encountered many of the people that I had seen the day before or had hostel with. Even though I walked all day by myself, I looked forward to finding my trail buddies at night. That was my social time, and I truly enjoyed it. I stayed every night in the albergue, which are hostels. Some of them are purpose-built. So the first one I stayed in was in Rosales, and I think that one could accommodate almost 300 people, purpose-built. Bunks. I tried to stay in the lower bunk. I tried to get a lower bunk every time, and I only failed once. And the places were equipped, many of them were equipped with kitchenettes, or a kitchen, I should say. Some of them had laundry facilities. Many of them had offered breakfast or dinner, the bigger ones, for an additional fee. The bedding, in many cases, was issued. They would give you like a Tyvek sheet when you got there, a disposable sheet. Some places didn't. I had real sheets once. And for the places where I didn't have a real sheet or a Tyvek sheet, I have to share one of my handiest tools. So my mother and my sister were both in the Peace Corps, and they gave me, one of them brought this back for me. And this was my sheet, my towel, my robe, everything. Because what I didn't say was, when I started, I had my pack weighed. You could weigh it at the starting point. And even though I was very careful about packing, and I shed some of the stuff after I left Plum Village, it was still twice the recommended weight. So the recommended weight is 10% of your body weight. And by the third day of walking, and I shed some stuff, but it didn't matter because then I was switching to a bicycle. But I can tell you that 10% of your one of the things that surprised me in these albergues that I was not necessarily prepared for, maybe because I'm American or sometimes I'm American, was the co-ed showers. That took some practice.
Do it 5 days in a row.
No, when you're hiking and you need to shower every day. I mean, you look forward to that. I really enjoyed seeing the young under 30 Italian men walking around in their underwear because they would just parade to the young Italian men and Spaniards and so on at their bunk and walk to the shower in their shorts. Well, what is a woman to do? It took me a little while to figure that out, and this is where, all right, that's where that came in handy. And you had to be really organized. You had to just know where your stuff was and just get really organized to go and shower. And some of the showers had a little antechamber, and some of them didn't. So you would just go, you'd get into the shower stall, and I'd take my cover off and hang it over and pray that it didn't get wet when I was showering. And just into it after a while, but that was different. I think I have a diary entry that I wanted to share about staying in the albergue. So I write in block letters: no privacy, take some organizing, co-ed bathrooms and showers, young men walking around in underwear. Last night, stereo snorers, even with earplugs. And the first time in this particular day, I was on an upper bunk. But, I say, it beats camping for more than one night in my book. Almost everywhere I stayed, I had free access to Wi-Fi, which is what I used to check in with at home. My mom, in particular, had asked me for a list of where I was going to be every night, and I indulged her. But after the third night, I never stayed in any of those towns, because that's just how the experience is. Stuff happens, you get delayed. Sometimes you choose to delay yourself. that's just how it was. I had made no promises of keeping in touch. I knew my family was going to be worried about me, but I tried every night. I think I only missed a couple of nights, right? One of the other issues that came up before I left was the device issue. Sean and I have shared a cell phone for a number of years, and I had got my very own cell phone sometime last year, and it sits on the kitchen counter, and I forget it more often than I remember it. So I have no real need for a cell phone, but a lot of people were worried about me. What, you're not going to have a cell phone? I said, well, if I get a cell phone, then I have to get a service, and, who am I going to call? Well, what if something happens? If something happens, some pilgrim will come along and fix it, help me. What am I going to do, call him? And I'm in Spain. He didn't do much for me. This was reinforced very quickly when I realized that in that part of Spain, the only language they speak is Spanish. That's it. I speak 3. Not Spanish. I could not communicate. That was rather frustrating for me for a number of reasons, and I'll visit them a little bit later on in there. So on my third night, it was in Pamplona. And I didn't put too many photographs in here. I didn't take that many to begin with, but that's Hemingway right there. That's where Hemingway spent a lot of time. He liked the corrida. I was looking forward to getting off my feet. After walking for 3 days with this pack that was twice as heavy as it should have been, my hips were hurting, I had blisters on my feet, and I was very excited to be transitioning to the bicycle. And the bicycle was going to allow me to cover about 3 days of walking in 1 day of riding, and that was riding about 80 kilometers a day. I had ordered this bike rental from the U.S. I'd rented it from a company in Portugal. It was a one-way rental, and I had requested it be delivered to the hostel in Pamplona, and I prayed that it would be there, and it was. I was very happy to find it there. It was in a box. Didn't require much assembly. Everything I could handle anyway. And that 10-day rental ran me 240 euros. So it was very reasonable. It came with a helmet, a lock, a repair kit, panniers, and I think that's it. But that's all I really needed. So I transferred my stuff out of my backpack into the bags on the bike, and the backpack I just carried empty on my back for the rest of the way. And let me see, it was a hybrid bike, but I think I could have rented a mounted bike if I wanted, but I decided on the hybrid bike. And I set off the next day, excuse me, with a heavy heart, because I was leaving my trail buddies behind. Now I was going to be traveling 3 days ahead of them. Or so I thought. I think I was in the saddle 20 minutes and got to my first hill and shifted, and the chain broke. So I got off the bike, and not too far behind me was a gentleman on a bike, and he stopped and tried to talk to me, and no habla, no comprendo, whatever. And fortunately, another gentleman showed up a few minutes later who actually spoke some English. And he said, look, fix that. And I said, well, is there a bike shop around here? And he scratched it. He was on a bicycle. I said, is there a bike shop around? And he scratched his head, and I thought, oh, okay. I'm in Pamplona, I'm in the city. And finally, he narrowed down where the bike shop was, and I said, well, how am I going to get to the bike shop? So he called me a cab. So the cab came, and off I went to the bike shop, got the bike fixed, and set off. I followed the walking pilgrims trail, which is extremely well marked, because I had done it for 3 days, and it seemed to me that I could ride that bicycle on the trail, on that trail. Well, not that section. Very shortly after I left Pamplona, I was in these sort of gravelly climbing area. I just couldn't move. So I was pushing the bike a lot. And the first day, I covered 20 kilometers and slept with all my buddies that I had sent. All my trail buddies were they were there already. Because remember, I got delayed. I got delayed because I had to fix the bike and so on and so forth. They were already all there, and they were scratching their heads. Here you are with the bike, this is it? So I decided that wasn't going to work for me. I needed another plan because I only had 10 days. And I wasn't going to make it to the end that way. So I switched, using that book that's going around, which is designed for a walking pilgrim. I tried to guess at what the roadway would be. And that led to some low points, some very low points. The following 3 days were difficult. I mean, the chain broke on the first day. I breathed through that. The second and third day, I got very lost. The road signs were very inadequate. Fortunately, the sun was out, and I knew I was heading west, and so that's what I used. But that was pretty frustrating, and I couldn't ask for directions, remember? So that was tough. But I just rode longer, I think 100 kilometers or more than the following 2 days. So on day 6, I believe, I was in Logrono, where I spent the night. Got up the next morning and it was damp out. It had probably rained overnight. It was not very nice. And I got on my bicycle early, pedaled to the end of the street and heard and now I had a flat tire. That happens when you're on a bike, right? No big deal. So I take everything off the bike and flip the bike over. And it was the back tire. And 2 young men, 18, 20, come over and they look like they want to help me. And I think, hey. And they do this, and I said, sure. And they get into it. And very quickly I realized they have no idea what they're doing. No idea. And so they start backing away slowly. But by now they've really messed things up pretty badly. And by now I'm thinking, whose idea was this? And I want to go home. It's wet, cold, I'm tired, and I want to go home. Yeah. This was definitely my lowest day. I'm trying to think of how am I going to go home? Now what? And then, I don't sit down on the sidewalk and start crying, but I think I was pretty close. And this lady who was delivering the mail walks by, and she comes over to me and talks to me. I don't know what she says. But she obviously is trying to help. And I understand when she says something about a mecanico, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I need. And I had a map of Logrono, so I pull it out and I show her, and she points to where the shop is, and I get my bike put back together again, and I push it over to the bike shop, and the bike shop's not open, so I sit on the stoop, and no, I don't cry, but I'm thinking about it. Get the bike fixed and get back on the road again. And this is where, for me, the first trail magic story happens. There were several trail magic stories, and I'll tell more. This is where the first one happens. I get back on the bike, and I'm pedaling through Logrono, the parks, and up, and there's people everywhere. People are going to work, pushing strollers, and playgrounds, and people sitting on park benches. And several people, I'd say maybe a half dozen or more, look at me in the eye, and say, "Buen camino, buen camino, buen camino." And that means, have a good pilgrimage, have a good town. So I went through Pamplona. I never heard it. Pilgrims say it to each other when they encounter another pilgrim. But these were people who lived in Logrono, who see 250,000 people schlepping through their town, who somehow sensed that I needed something. I don't know if I might have been crying, I don't know if I was, but I obviously was emanating some negative energy. And, after the third or fourth one looked at me and said, "Buen camino," it was just, okay, I can do this. All right, I get it. I need to keep going. And I did. I went on. Fortunately, those 3 difficult days were followed by some incredible days, including the day right there in the middle that I rode by the wine fountain. I was riding through the Rioja region, and there's some trail magic right there. Liquid trail magic. It was 10 in the morning, but I filled my thermos. I filled my thermos up, and I saved it for that evening. One of the other lovely moments was one of the cafes that occurred a few days later. I just came down this hill, and the sun lit up the front of this cafe, and there were a few pilgrims sitting around, and I just thought, time for a break. I think I sat there for 2 hours, just because it felt good. It felt really good. There weren't many of those cafes open. For those of you who saw the way, and they show those cafes and stuff, there's lots of them along the way, but they're not open in November. There were very few that were open. Very few. So here's the back side of the front side, so starting at day 18. Once you leave the olive groves and over the mountains, and then the olive groves and the Rioja Valley with the vineyards, you get into this middle section here between León and Burgos, which is very flat. Very, very flat. Actually, I was surprised at what it looked like. It reminded me of Arizona, with mesas and no trees. Not anything I expected. But I was really able to zone out completely. The riding was easy, the weather was nice. Those were some pretty good days, and I'll probably come back to this slide in a minute, but I'll go forward to this one here, where there are some pictures of sort of the halfway point. As you can see, Santiago de Compostela, 497 kilometers. So I'm about halfway. I have another diary entry on that section right there that I'd like to share with you. So, mindful bike riding. I don't know how that could be, but yes, I'm noticing the smells, the leftover yellow sunflowers in the field, stork's nests. I was fascinated by those. And I write, this Camino is a metaphor for life. Ups and downs, great days and challenges, mechanical and other. Getting lost and finding the way back. And at the end of the day, knowing and believing that all you need is right in front of you. Love, food, and a roof over your head. My heart is truly full of gratitude. This was a precious moment for me. It was a click, something clicked, finally, after that many days. I believe that entry, the start of that entry said that was my best day so far. But I had another best day 2 days later. So there were fortunately, far more good days than there were bad days. My second best day that happened a couple of days later actually happened up here. That climb on the bicycle, actually no, I'm sorry, this hill up here. That climb was pretty brutal. But again, I was fortunate, it was a lovely day. And that place I stayed at, Marin, at the top, was very different from all the other places I stayed at. It was primitive. It was run by these couple of guys who fancied themselves as Knights Templar. There was no running water, no heat, a pit latrine, showers were out of the question. It was really, really primitive. But I'm so happy I stayed there. I think it was just such an important part of the experience to just be in that sort of basic place. It was lovely. It really was. It really was. And the ride down the next morning, woohoo! That was something. That was amazing. There's another steep, very, very steep climb a couple of days later, and it's a couple of days on the bicycle. This year, I got up, I stayed in the valley down there. I got up that day and got on the bicycle, and I rode uphill for 3 solid hours and did not see a soul. I didn't see a car. And it was switchbacks. And every time I go around the corner, I go, there's only one more, right? And then I get there, and then, and there was another one, and then there was another one, there was another one. I guess I was about a half hour from the top when I just got off the bike, and I couldn't go anymore. I don't think I've ever encountered that before, where I just, there was nothing left in the tank, nothing. So I pushed the bike up and then rode down, but then all those little hills after that, every time I hit one of those hills, they were easy, piece of cake, right? Hey, I rode that, nope, nothing left. And so things slowed down a little bit the last few days. There was a lot of pushing up the bicycle. There was another episode of getting lost. Because I was negotiating between trail and road, I wasn't. I lost track of. I missed the albergue I wanted to stay at, the hostel. I don't know how that happened. I always planned the next day, the night before, and had an idea of where I wanted to stay. It was important to do that because, unlike in the summertime where everything's open, in the winter or after, when the season's ending, a lot of these places close down and you really need to know where the open places are. So I planned where I was going to stay, and I missed it. I don't know how I did, but I did. And I was having a hard time finding the next place. I ended up on getting on the trail so that I didn't miss it. So I was pushing again because it was not rideable. And then every time I came to a road, I would try to get on the road, and I'd go for a few kilometers, and I'd go, no, this doesn't look good, and I'd turn around and come back. And at that time of year in Europe, it gets dark pretty early. And I was getting pretty frustrated because I could see I was running out of daylight, and it wasn't looking really good. And I started contemplating the bus shelter with the bench as a possible place to snooze. A little further down there was some hay or bales in the field, and I was starting to have ideas that I wasn't going to be sleeping in a hostel. But it turned out okay. I found my way to a hostel after dark. That was the only place that I ended up getting to after dark. I had another day of trail magic that was pretty extraordinary that happened in a town called Sahagún. When I arrived in that town, it was a pretty miserable town. I had a hard time finding the hostel. When I found it, it was an old church, which could have been charming, but it really wasn't. There were no windows. It had been modified inside. There was no natural daylight in it. Stone, cold, damp. There were very few people staying there, and everybody who was staying there was pretty creepy. They were just creepy. The whole place was creepy. I slept poorly. When I got up in the morning, a guy had come in from the outside of a townie, had come in who obviously hadn't gone to bed yet, and he was still very drunk, and sat down and started to talk to me, which was useless. Anyway, I couldn't wait to get out of there, so packed up, and when I walked out the door, the fog was so thick you could barely see in front of you, very far anyway. It was very cold. It was barely above freezing, so I had socks over my gloves and hat underneath my helmet, and I started to pull away from the hostel, and I was going to follow the road signs that directed me to the town I was going for, which was Lyon. And the road sign told me to go left, and I took a left, and there was a tanker truck at the intersection. And I noticed the driver gesticulating. There was nothing else going on. It was very early in the morning. So I stopped, and he wound down his window, and he started talking to me, and I said, And he was pointing in the opposite direction. He knew I was a pilgrim. He was pointing in the opposite direction, and I said, no, I want us to go on the ruta, no pista, I want to go on the road. And he's insisting that I go the opposite way of the sign. So I decided to trust him, and I went that way. And I crossed, it was downhill, went through town, and on the other side of this town, Sahagún, my little man and his tanker appear. So he'd made his delivery. He appears out of a side street, and he pulls over, and he gets out of the truck, and he comes over with a piece of paper, and he's drawing a map, and he's telling me in Spanish the way I need to go, and I'm sort of understanding this way 5 kilometers, there's a bus stop, you need to take a right after the bus stop. I'm kind of getting it. Okay, fine. And he said, if you go this way, I understand that I will be saving 20 kilometers. Well, I was into saving at that point. So off I go on the bicycle again in the thick fog. And I travel, and I'm looking for this bus stop, and all of a sudden I see some headlights and a beep beep in the fog, and there's my guy again, and he's doing this, and I had sure enough passed the turn. He obviously knew I was going to miss it, and he waited for me. And I'm thinking, why? You see 250,000 people come through here every single year, and you stop to help me. So I just thought that was a very, very special, touching moment. I couldn't have done this without all this magic. I really couldn't. So back to this picture, this slide. I go from the halfway point to the end here really quickly. But so the middle picture shows me right before I entered Santiago, and there's a picture of the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, because it's the biggest cathedral I've ever seen in my life. It just and there are all kinds of bits and pieces, and it looks like it's been added on to 6 million times. And obviously that's the ending point of the trip, or for most people. There's actually an extra leg that goes to Finisterre, which I didn't have time to do, but a lot of people will do. It's a 3-day walk to the coast. But for many, this is the end of the trail. And it's a bittersweet ending. The last day, I found myself slowing down. Even though I was eager to be done, I wasn't. I didn't want it to end. It was really an odd feeling, really very odd feeling. When I got there, I turned in the bike. I actually ended up going to Mass twice. Although I was looking forward to perhaps visiting cathedrals and holy places along the way, it just didn't work out. A lot of the places were locked. Remember, it's a seasonal thing, or they're only open, for very narrow hours of the day. So it didn't happen, and I let it go. I let it go very early on. I said, this is not what it's about. And I did most of my reflecting, praying, whatever you want to call it, in the saddle or walking. It was mindful most of the time. I was in the moment and enjoying the moment and not worried about a whole lot. I would love to go back and visit all these places. I was pretty surprised a couple of days afterwards when I thought, gee, would you do this again? I asked myself that question, and I've known in the past when I've done things that are difficult, and people have asked me that question, I've said, can you ask me that again in 2 months? Days afterwards, the answer was a definite yes. I would do it again. I would have done it again right then and there, I think, with a couple of days of rest. Turn around and go back. I was lucky to experience the Botifumario, which is not used at all masses. They actually only use it certain times of the year, or if somebody pays to see it. And what that is, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, is in the end there's a giant incense chandelier, I suppose you want to call it, that swings from the ceiling, and it's really very, very impressive. But it takes about 9 or 10 people to get this thing going, so they don't do it at every mass, and I felt very blessed to have seen that. It's pretty impressive and moving. What else was I blessed with? I was blessed with no rain, which is extraordinary. It rained when I got to Santiago, so I did not have to walk or ride in the rain. I rode in the cold and the fog, but not in the rain. it just occurred to me that there was one thing, really important thing that I didn't talk about. One of the early slides is food. Food's important to me. I talked to you about food at Plum Village. When I was planning this trip, I was thinking, I'm going to be having all that great food with tapas and all this, and it didn't work out. I found that the dinner was late, too late for me. You really couldn't sit down to a meal until 8 o'clock at night. By then I was ready to sleep. Even if I could stay up until 9, if I started eating at 8, I couldn't go to bed at 9 after the kind of meal that was being prepared. They were generally lots of great food. And I found what worked best for me was actually to stop every 2 hours and snack. I ate, nuts and oranges and bananas and yogurt, and I'd buy a half dozen hard-boiled eggs and boil them and eat them for the next 3 days. I had cheese. So ham, they have great ham. Oh, the ham is so good. But it was snacking. And I stopped every day to make the purchase because you don't want to carry it, and obviously it spoils as well. So I didn't really want to end talking about the food, but I wanted to address it because I think that's a question sometimes that comes up. What's next? Before I answer that question, that's in the middle. That's where I was saying it was really flat, and then there were these mesas. But the thought that went through my mind right there when I took that picture was, where's a girl to pee? We could go, hey, you know what? There was nobody there, so it wasn't really a problem. I think I actually did relieve myself right then and there, and I saw some hunters a few minutes later. But that was the question. That was what happened there. So I don't know what's next. I still don't know what's next. The purpose wasn't necessarily to know what's next, but I'm not anxious about it anymore, which is really what the purpose was. I enjoy each day, surrounded by the people I love, and I live in one of the most beautiful places on earth. I found myself on the trail telling people, people obvious question that you have, when you meet people is, hey, where are you from? I always said I'm from Stowe, Vermont, and it's just one of the most beautiful places. So I'm at peace with that, and I'm at peace with not knowing. I know that these adventures are at my disposal, or I can take one of these trips anytime I need to or want to. Almost. I need to fit it obviously into my innkeeping world, but I think that they are going to continue to be a part of me going forward. And I also I'm equipped with mindful meditation to cope with the daily anxieties that might occur. This was a fabulous trip, but it's definitely not the only way. There's a lot of other things people do in their lives, at different times in their lives when they're at a crossroads, that people do to help them move forward. I hate to put you on the spot, Neil, but I actually had you in my notes. I didn't know you were coming. But Neil here a couple of years ago spent the summer as a park ranger in the Adirondacks by himself in nature. We never talked about it, but I'm guessing it had a lot to do with this kind of experience. Some people join the Peace Corps between college and entering the working world. Some people, like my mother, even join the Peace Corps after they retire, because that's another transitional time in your life. Some people go away to write the next great American novel for several weeks. And if you can't come up with an original idea, there are companies out there that actually will put together a package, a 2 or 3 week package, and guide you through a process that will allow you to free your mind. So I would like to think that everybody has access to this somehow. Oh, I have one more friend I just ran into 2 days ago in the grocery store here in Stowe, a fellow innkeeper who has decided to ride his motorcycle by himself across the country in the spring. So there's another example of doing something similar.
What is it about innkeeping?
Pardon me? What is it about innkeeping, Bill? Thank you.
Whose passport is this?
That's mine.
That's you?
That is me.
Wow.
It's almost expired for another year.
Good to point that out. Just in case, right? So are there any questions? Yes.
A couple of things are going through my mind. One is the challenge of this. Was that a satisfying thing to you, just to meet the challenge? And where was the joy?
I'm not a natural athlete.
But you're a bike rider. You're a rider.
I ride, but I don't ride the way Pascal rides. Does everyone know Pascal? In the summertime, I like to go for a bike ride. I generally only have about an hour. And I do so, I try to go at least 5 days of the week, but sometimes I don't. So I don't, like I said, I'm not, so I've never competed athletically. So your question was, where's the joy? I like to hike, and maybe some people can identify with that. When you're on a hike, the joy, you make all this effort to get to the summit, and that's where the joy is. It's the reward of the beauty that you experience at the top after exerting yourself. Is there as much pleasure when you drive to the top of Mount Washington? I don't think so personally. There's more pleasure in earning it, in my opinion, for me. So yes, it was physically. I don't know where I got the energy. To tell you the truth, I don't know where I got the energy. I don't. It's not like I trained for this or anything. I just did it. I did it.
The spirituality that I have always thought people on this pilgrimage feel.
Yes,
Tell me
absolutely.
about that for you.
Well, I'm calling it trail magic. I'm trying to make this sort of generally acceptable to the audience here. Everybody's different. But I personally feel that without that greater force, I wouldn't have been able to complete this pilgrimage. You can call it God, Allah, whatever you want. I don't think I would have been able to complete it. I believe that everything that happened to me on this trip was not random. That I was given challenges, or challenges were put forth for me to overcome, and I overcame them through my faith, for example. I believe that, yes. Yes.
If you had not spent a week at Plum Village, do you think your experience would have differed?
Really interesting, because like I said, the genesis of the trip started with Plum Village, and it was a crazy thought. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to be in the area. Why don't I just do the Camino? I don't know. I think that Plum Village was a very important part of me succeeding mentally, because I found myself using what I had learned to overcome some of the challenges. Taking those deep breaths, enjoying the moment, even though the moment was ugly. I enjoyed the moment, whatever they were. Yeah.
How much do you think this trip would have changed if you had done it with somebody else opposed to yourself on your own?
I think the experience would have been very, very different. Better or worse, no. I just don't think I would have gotten the same things out of it. As I said earlier, the obvious choice would have been to do it with Sean, and it's not that I didn't do it with Sean. I didn't physically do it with Sean, but without Sean's support, there's no way I could have done this. And I invite him to come up here and answer questions that people might have for him, because I know there were a lot of questions that people asked him before I left.
Like, are you crazy to let it go?
It would have been probably, I don't know that we would have finished it. I think we would have taken more time to enjoy ourselves and eat out and enjoy the food and maybe visit the sites. But that's not what I was doing. It wasn't about the food and the sights. It was about looking inside of me and figuring out whether I could stand without that crutch. I mean, I'm a bit of a technophobe. Anytime I have a problem, I walk over with my thing and I say, fix it, right? Well, I found very quickly with the I had a phone, but it didn't have cellular, so I had to use Wi-Fi every night. Several times I just couldn't make it work. Every time I tried to send something with the email, it would bounce back, and I couldn't figure out why. And so I explored other things, and I found that if I went into the photos section, I could send a photo thing. Hit the share button and shared it. I could send him a picture of the day saying, I'm in this town and I'm fine. And that's what I did. But if he had been there and we were trying to communicate with my mother, for example, I would have just said, this thing doesn't work, fix it. You send the email. You make it work. And so I know now that I can figure it out. I want to figure more stuff out now on my own. I've decided that I need to put more effort into that. It's good for me. What I'm doing tonight, that's stepping outside of my boundaries too, and my comfort zone. I think it helps you grow, or it helps me grow. And I think I experienced that even with my own children when they were taken out of their comfort zone in their home. Those were always times where I always saw a change in them growing up, we forgot the bottle. Oopsie. Well, that's when we shed the bottle, right? For example. Because we're not at home. When they went away to camp, they always came back different people. So I embrace that now. I'd like to do more of it. Does anyone have any questions for Sean?
When's your trip?
Well, thank you all for coming. I'm really touched with And if anyone is in the early preparation stages and has questions about the nuts and bolts, I'm happy to answer them. You're welcome. Was it? Did I do already? Okay. I'll just say for me, just one thing. It was important for me as nice. That was all those more courageous things.